We watched episode 4 of Andor, so you know what time it is. Hit that intro!
Woo!
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, everybody, if it's your first time joining us, welcome. We're two dads who love all things fandom, from Star Wars to Star Trek, Marvel to DC, and Middle-earth on down to Westeros. We love it all, and we want to bring all of our insights and love of all things nerdy to you, our viewers. So if that's your glass of ice-cold blue milk, then we're here for you, and you should definitely subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on all of our amazing reviews and insight that we bring to all of our favorite fandoms. So thanks for tuning in, guys. My name is Chris Matthews, and I'm joined, as always, by my driving buddy, Mr. Matt Parham. How you doing today, brother?
Not too bad. Glad to be here as always. Got a little bit of storm brewing over Denver, but I think we'll be okay.
So let's just jump right into it. I'm going to take us off on this journey to Andor. So this episode, we see Andor accept Luthen's mission with a group that has been living off-grid on a planet called Aldhani for about 5 months. We learn that Luthen is operating an antique store on Coruscant as a front to fund operations against the Empire. So it's a really cool episode all in all. I really enjoyed this episode of Andor. And the level of detail, oh my gosh, the world building too was so impressive.
Yeah.
We got our first on-screen appearance of the Imperial Security Bereau, which was really exciting, where we follow Deidre Metro, who is one of the supervisors of the ISB, played by Denise Gao. So the Imperial Security Bureau, it's a law enforcement agency, sort of like the FBI for the Empire, and it was charged with the internal state security, ensuring the loyalty of citizens throughout the Empire. It's really cool, and in Rebels, one of the main characters in that show, Agent Callus, worked as one of the ISB's top members. And another character that we see that was part of the ISB was Wolf's Yularen from the Clone Wars. He was Admiral Yularen from the Clone Wars, if you've ever seen that. In the beginnings of those shows where they're first time in Clone Wars, the fighting continues. That guy Yularen, he was a part of the ISB too during the Empire. And he worked alongside Thrawn to investigate an insurgent leadership group, pirate group known as Nightswain. And this story can be found in one of the most amazing books called Thrawn by Timothy Zahn. If you haven't read it or listened to it on Audible, go ahead and do yourself a favor. It's a really good book.
Now,
I highly recommend it.
Is that the first part of the series on Thrawn, or is that...
No, there's a few Thrawn books, but that one basically takes place where Thrawn goes through the ranks of the Empire. So it's one of my favorite ones, and I very much enjoyed that book.
Thrawn is always an exciting subject for me, and we've heard hints that he may appear in Ahsoka, the series. So what's he doing during this time that Andor is going on? And is there any chance that we would see him around in this series?
I don't think that Thrawn's probably going to appear in this show, per se. I think he'll probably make an appearance in Ahsoka. But yeah, right now he's dealing with Rebels and everything else in that storyline. So if you want to see what Thrawn is doing, I highly recommend you watch the show Rebels. you know? All that stuff is great to watch, even if you're an adult. It's definitely captivating and part of the story if you want to dive deeper.
Yeah, and it gives us so many different perspectives of this time period during Star Wars history that it's just, I love it. So much to enjoy.
So I kind of wanted to talk too about, like, because these ISB members, they're in white uniforms. We see different insignias and stuff. So let's get all that kind of stuff straightened out. So on these ISB security officers, we're seeing blue rank insignias, and this does indicate that they're actually a security division of the Empire. If you see red insignias on their vests and everything, that's an army thing. Blue and red indicates Navy. Yellow indicates Army operations. And all three of those colors together kind of represents the Grand Moff. So if you look at Grand Moff Tarkin in the original Star Wars, he has all three of those colors on there. So he's kind of overarching in charge of all of those different divisions within the Empire. So we get a look at Major Portagaz. He's played by Anton Lesser, and that actor might look familiar to you guys. You know what else he was in, Matt?
I couldn't put my finger on it, but while I was watching the show, I've seen him in Star Wars. I know I've seen him somewhere.
Seen him somewhere. He's got a familiar face, and if you guys out there don't know what he's from, I looked this up, and I knew right away what he was from. He was from Game of Thrones, where he played where he played Kyber, the deranged maester who brought the mountain back to life. So if he's
Dr. Frankenstein.
Been in multiple fantasy shows. Yes, Dr. Frankenstein, that's right.
Yeah.
And so we get a look at him. He did a great job in this role of bringing it all together and keeping everybody on task. I like that character a lot. I love this world building and getting to see behind the scenes on how the Empire is actually working. So we also got to see Lieutenant Supervisor Blevin, played by Ben Bailey Smith, and he shuts down the Praxis Morlana Authority in this show, which we saw in the last episode botches the investigation to find Andor. We see Cyril Karn, again played by Kyle Solar, and his group gets fired, and Cyril has to leave and ends up going to live with his mother in this episode, apparently.
Right.
And she slaps him across the face. I thought that was a real interesting choice for him.
Yeah.
And he doesn't really say much in this episode, but his performance does tell a lot about how the character is defeated and angry over what has happened. So it was a good performance nonetheless.
He's got a real like Toby Maguire vibe going on, don't you think? Like almost a little conflicted, a little innocent, but I don't know. I don't know where they're headed with it.
Right? That's a good comparison, I think, Toby Maguire. He's got a little bit of that energy with him. And the character itself, as we saw in the first 3 episodes, had good intentions, and it all just fell apart, even though he was trying to do the right thing. So it was very interesting to see a character like that is kind of an antagonist that has good motivations and good reasonings for what they're doing. And I'm really interested to see where this character goes. I know that he's going to be in it for another few episodes, so I wonder, let's talk about that, Matt. Do you think that this guy is going to go full on bore with the Empire, or is he going to end up being a part of the rebellion? Is he going to branch out in that
Whenever I first saw episode 1, I thought they are definitely going with, like I mentioned in our previous podcast, a parallel to Javert from Les Miserables, and it's a great storyline in that musical, where you just have this sort of relentless authority figure after the main character. And I thought, okay, we've never seen that kind of dynamic with Star Wars, where it the character that they're after has broken the law, in kind of like a big way. Like, I mean, in this case, Andor killing 2 of their officers, it's a big deal. And so, why wouldn't this by the book officer be relentless in his pursuit? But now they've gone a totally different direction with him. He's fired. He's been disgraced. And I don't know. I think maybe we could get a conversion of some sort. Maybe he'll end up being a double agent for the rebellion. That'd be the best I'd have for a prediction right now. What do you think?
It's kind of a parallel to in Rebels, Agent Callus, like I brought up earlier. He was an agent of the ISB. He eventually, spoiler alert, converts to the Rebel Alliance. So I really do think that he is going to be a major player when it comes to that. And I kind of do think that he's going to join in with the cause of the rebellion.
Yeah.
But you don't know at this point. He might just become part of the Empire, and once again, he's got this singular goal of capturing Andor, so he might be a big antagonist, too. They could play this character either way right now.
What I think is unique to Andor is they really seem to be trying to distinguish themselves as a part of Star Wars that you've not seen before. And so I would be kind of curious to see if they'll repeat that storyline, from another Star Wars property. I don't know. It would still be interesting. It would still be entertaining for sure. And I love the character's portrayal so far. So if he does end up flipping, it would make sense with how we've seen him. But I don't know. It's unpredictable, and I like that.
I do too. I like that it's unpredictable. I like that it's off the grid of what we've gotten with Star Wars before. Yeah. And if you've seen Rebels, that kind of takes place in the time frame of the universe where the rebellion is being formed and whatnot. And this show is kind of doing the same thing. So they both kind of are parallel in that aspect. Right. But I just love, and I hope that we never see a lightsaber. I hope that we never see a Jedi or anything else in this show. I want to see on the ground with all these real characters that we're getting. And it seems like that's the show we're getting. And I absolutely love that. And that's probably the best thing about this and why it's so refreshing to me. But it's really cool, too, how they're actually implementing all of and sprinkling in all these like Star Wars references to the show. And I found a few and I wanted to kind of bring them up here on the show. Fun fact for Cassian, he mentions fighting in Mimban and when he was 16 years old. And we actually see this conflict in Solo, a Star Wars story. Right. This is the big battle that Han Solo was a part of when he was in the Empire. Same thing. So we get to see that
kind of started
on Solo as well, which is really cool.
His trajectory to becoming a smuggler since he was no good at being a soldier, really. So.
Right. It's very cool to see like these two characters that end up being in the rebellion start off kind of in the same spot in a way. So I like that. And then we have Luthen, who gives Cassian a necklace that contains a blue Kyber crystal. So if you guys know about Kyber crystals, those are what power a lightsaber. So they're incredibly rare and everything, and they're used for Jedi's lightsabers. And what he actually calls this is a Kawadi signet that he claims is a sky stone from the ancient world. And he states that the Kyber celebrates the uprising against the Rakatan invaders. And so the Rakatan invaders were a race of Force users of the dark side who took over the galaxy a long time ago. And they encountered like the early Jedi on the planet Tython. And if you guys recognize that name, Tython was actually shown in The Mandalorian in season 2 of The Mandalorian, where Grogu used the Seeing Stone to contact the Jedi. So Luke Skywalker in there. So that planet is very important in the history and the lore of Star Wars and the creation of the Jedi. So it's really cool that we get to see a little element of that. In that ISB meeting, one of the ISB officers mentions Ryloth, which, if anybody knows, is the home of the Twi'leks. And we've seen Ryloth in both Clone Wars, Rebels, and Bad Batch. And there's always been a lot of uprisings and things like that on that planet. So it makes sense that they would bring that up because they're a security team that needs to keep check of all the different factions within the Empire to make sure that they're loyal. So it's really cool that they mentioned that too. So a lot of really cool little stuff that they're putting in there. Just so much stuff sprinkled throughout that scene of this show, which is really cool.
So, like whenever he inevitably gets arrested, maybe there's a raid on his little shop there and stuff stolen.
Yeah. And there's some stone tablets, too, that are right there in the front of that antique store that are from the world between worlds. So that's going to be really cool. Wow. And if you've seen Rebels, you know what that's all about. And I was like, whoa, that's awesome that they're linking all these little things from all over Star Wars together in this one show. But they're doing it in a way that's kind of subtle and doesn't, like, put it in your face. It's like the plot is going on, and it's telling the story, but it's just set in this universe, and I love that.
That's what I really love too, Chris, because I watched this episode, took it at face value the first time, and really I knew that we had to have been getting some Easter eggs. I'm sure there was stuff that I wasn't recognizing, but what I was most interested in was the story, and the other stuff was there. I knew the nods were happening, but it didn't matter. Ultimately, I was still drawn to the storyline. It very much feels like reading a book about Andor and his introduction into the rebellion and the growth of the rebellion, which I absolutely love. It reminds me of the movie The Good Shepherd, if you've seen that, where we see Matt Damon's character in that film grow from being part of international espionage during World War II to the founding of the CIA. But it also includes his counterpart characters in the Russian side of the Cold War, which I think we're getting that in Andor as well. And so I love the parallels. I don't think that they're intentional. I think that's just another good spy thriller out there, and a good Shepard.
Well, they might be. Like, Tony Gilroy, he did the Bourne Identity, and he's really from that kind of a spy movie genre. And really, Tony Gilroy wasn't really that interested in Star Wars, to be honest. So he came about this show in a way that wanted to tell a different story and wanted to tell something that was completely different. And I think he's knocking it out of the park. Like, obviously, like, his brother Dan Gilroy is writing this episode too. So it was really cool to see that he's making it a family affair too.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're giving us a show that doesn't seem to be constrained as we've seen some of the other shows. You know, it's telling its own story in its own part of the Star Wars universe, and I like that a lot. We just have no way of knowing what's next, even though ultimately we know what happens to these characters in Rogue One. But they're still maintaining the excitement and the tension, and it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of have a feeling the way it's going so far, we saw the first 3 episodes last week, and getting to see this episode, it kind of feels like they're going to be doing this like 3-part story throughout the first season of this. Because this first episode this episode 4 here kind of seems like the first little part, and the next 2 episodes after this are actually written by Dan Gilroy and directed by Susanna White. So I think we're going to get a series like that. And this next little section is going to be the Aldhani arc, and we're going to see this throughout the show where they have mini arcs like this throughout. Like the first 3 kind of go together, and this next 3 episodes is going to kind of go together as one story. So it's almost like we're getting these hour-and-a-half almost 3-hour movies, because this one was like an hour long. So it's almost like we're getting these little movies throughout this season, and I very much enjoy it. And that's the feel that I'm getting from this show, with the effects, with the with where these are shot, the locations that we're getting, just how amazing it looks, and the real world feel that we're getting in this show. So far, absolutely loving it. So for my rating, I'm going to give this episode a 9 out of 10. Some might think like this episode in itself might be a slower pace than what we're used to, but I'm actually loving the care and time that they're giving to this story. And like I said, this is probably the first of 3 episodes in this little story arc.
Right. And
so just as we discussed with Game of Thrones, you can have an amazingly well done episode without a lot of action if the story and the characters are actually intriguing. And this definitely does it here with Andor, and I highly recommend it. Don't be sleeping on Andor. So
no, absolutely not. We're introduced to
A+ rating.
Rating for you, and sorry, I was saying we're introduced to a lot of interesting characters, and a lot of interesting plot lines that are just continuing to develop more and more into places that we don't necessarily predict, which I think is a characteristic of great storytelling, and I can't wait to see what happens next. This reminded me so much of one of those chapters in a really good book where not a lot has to happen, but the world building, character building, and the plot tension is just ramped up a little more. Exciting things are coming. And so I also liked that it gave us moments in there that really didn't have much to do with the rebellion or anything at all. I loved Mon Mothma and her husband having that tiny little spat. Man, what a great character moment. You see the tension she feels at home, let alone all the conflict that she's having to deal with being a double agent for the rebellion. Great performance.
You feel that tension right off the bat.
Yeah, absolutely. Genevieve O'Reilly did wonderful as Mon Mothma, and I'm really excited.
Absolutely, and she played Mon Mothma in Episode 3 as well as Rogue One, so she's a returning character that we've gotten to see her play, and she's been doing a fantastic job with.
Yeah, I was really glad to see her in the trailer whenever it dropped. And,
Me too.
It's gonna be so cool. Her and Stellan Skarsgård bouncing off of each other a little bit, turning immediately whenever they get to the back room. And, it just felt so much like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, or any of those good spies.
Yes.
And it was very cool. So Yeah, 9 out of 10 for me. You know what else I really loved that I just have to mention before we get going here is the effects. This had some great scenes of Coruscant.
Coruscant looked realer than anything I've seen so far in all of Star Wars. It looked like a real world place that they actually filmed in.
Even when,
and that was just beautiful.
No, it was absolutely beautiful. Even whenever people were just sort of walking around slowly, on stairwells and stuff, it was really hard to figure out what was actual concrete building, what was CGI, and that's perfect.
Yeah.
You don't even think about it anymore. You're just immersed.
Right? Yeah. Industrial Light and Magic, you guys are killing it right now with this show and what you guys are producing as well. And I gotta give it up for the showrunner too, Tony Gilroy, for having a vision with this. But just hats off to all the production team with this for making things look so real and lived in too. So it's amazing all around.
Yeah. So 9 out of 10 for both of us is a great episode, and
9 out of 10.
It sounds like we both look forward to even more.
Definitely don't sleep on Andor, guys. This is becoming one of my favorites. I gotta say, Mandalorian is probably my number one, but this is definitely a close second so far. I really look forward to this. This is my most favorite thing that we've watched recently, on a weekly basis. I like this more than Game of Thrones. I like this more than Rings of Power. This is my show. This is what I watch, and I'm just I'm just so impressed so far. So, nothing but good things for me and Matt here at Fatherly Fandom. You got anything else for us before we hyperdrive on out of here?
I don't think so, buddy. Let's hit it.
All right, hit it. So from our families to yours, adios.